Ever since the end of World War II, Germany was at a divide. It was often referred to at the time as a battleground for debate and arguments amongst political leaders during the Cold War, which began in 1947. The divide itself was between the east of Germany and the west. This was because countries who intervened in the Second World War occupied areas of Germany. In the west of Germany, there was England, France, and the United States. In the east of Germany, there was the Soviet Union, who were under the orders of their leader, Joseph Stalin.
Born into the Russian Empire, Joseph Stalin became the dictator of the Soviet Union from 1929 until his death in 1953. Many would commend him for making Russia, a once weak and struggling society, into the militarized superpower we easily recognize. During his reign, the people under him lived in fear, and millions of these innocents died during his time as ruler. Although some were granted a quick end to their lives, Stalin did have his enemies executed in painful manners. Some unfortunate souls were sent to labor camps. Many would say was a fate worse than death. However, throughout World War II, Stalin was in allegiance with Britain and the USA. But after that storm cloud had passed, there was tension between these Western superpowers, which sparked this event.
Stalin's reign during the Cold War was short, but that wasn't to say it was uneventful. The main focus was for him to remain in control and to also gain more communist territories. Berlin was a centerpiece of the conflict. This was the Big Divide. This was because Berlin was located closer to the east, being run by Stalin, than the west, which was occupied by the UK, French, and American allies. Although there was this separation between east and west, the people of Berlin were allowed to roam free in both areas until ideologies from the east began to change. The strain of war left Stalin in such a state that in 1953, the USSR's leader suffered a stroke. This left his great power in the hands of Georgy Malenkov for 2 years, until he was quickly overthrown by Nikita Khrushchev in 1955. Moving on 6 years into his leadership, an order was initiated via a telephone call between Khrushchev and Walter Ulbricht, a communist German politician.
Khrushchev was the man who somehow led the East into an even darker place than what it was. It started with de-Stalinization, which was a 4-step plan for further control. The first step was the speeches. Khrushchev would spout numerous speeches in order to rally more support and show his authority. The second step was dominating Soviet media. Stalin's writings, statues, portraits, and overall image were to be wiped out. His body was even removed from a mausoleum to be simply buried beneath the Kremlin wall. The third step was the change in policies. Khrushchev was nothing at all like his predecessor. He allowed those who were imprisoned in the camps to be free once again. He eliminated the idea of using terror to rule over others. And he even looked after those who suffered throughout Stalin's rule. The fourth step, however, was escalating restrictions, meaning that even though they were no longer ruled by a ruthless terrormonger, Khrushchev wanted literature, debates, and expressionism to be controlled.
On August 19, 1961, East Germans woke up to find a barbed wire fence separating them from the West. In the opening stages of the wall being built, there are already homes destroyed, and a consequence to this, hard-working people losing their jobs. Sometime later, the barbed wire was upgraded to a 155-kilometer concrete wall. This meant in some areas of the East, this would be 6.3 meters tall. But even that wasn't enough. Watchtowers were erected to view East Germans from a high point, and armed guards operated the wall every day, giving the orders, shoot to kill. Around 100,000 people on the inside of the wall attempted to flee the nightmare they were living in. 5,000 succeeded, and a confirmed 200 were killed from failed attempts at escape. The unlawful containment and killings did not go unnoticed.
In 1963, President Kennedy landed in Berlin to deliver a powerful message to the people of both the East and the West. At Rudolph Wilde Square, he addressed the people with this speech.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
After this small glimpse of hope, the president was assassinated 5 months later. The people of Berlin would rename the square after Kennedy in remembrance of that historical visit.
President John F. Kennedy paid a visit to Vienna in June 1961 for a summit in which Khrushchev was present. This only made the situation worse. Kennedy was thought to have been shocked and surprised at Nikita's formidable tone, as he threatened to cut off the Allies' access to the west of Berlin. Addressing the American people shortly after, Kennedy announced that the states may need to defend the rights to Berlin, even if it meant by exchanging bullets. After all this glimmer of hope from Kennedy, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the space race, things were no different in the east of Berlin. In 1964, Khrushchev was forced to retire as leader of the Soviet Union. Then, nothing changed. The wall was still standing. Many remained trapped inside, attempting to flee for years. However, the Soviet Union continued to alter for nearly 27 years. 3 leaders stepped up to fill the role Stalin had first established. The first step up was Leonid Brezhnev, who served until 1982. Following Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov led the party for a short period of 2 years. Konstantin Cherenkov then continued where Andropov left off for just over a year. It was then in 1985 that Mikhail Gorbachev gained control until the very end of the Berlin Wall ordeal. While Gorbachev was in power, he was able to re-establish a better, functioning economy for the people he ruled over. Things began to look brighter for the whole of Berlin. In 1987, another US president landed on German soil to address the people once again.
It would come as no surprise that a Hollywood star would eventually wind up making world-changing decisions in the White House. Republican candidate Ronald Reagan began his presidency in 1981 and was active during the closing days of the Cold War. He was often regarded as the great communicator and was able to negotiate a reduction regarding Soviet nuclear weapons to bring a quicker end to the Cold War conflict. "Tear down this wall" was yet another powerful quote which echoed throughout the world nearing the last days of the Berlin Wall.
In 1989 was a massive year for the people of Berlin. Gorbachev began to make huge changes to the divide between the East and the West. Cracks began to appear. Guards were given new orders not to shoot at residents contained within the wall. The Soviet Union's tight grip began to loosen, and by the 9th of November of that same year, East Germans were allowed to cross the border. After 28 years of living in isolation, both the East and West were reunited. Celebration was shared across the world. The wall was being broken apart piece by piece for both East and West Germans, marking an end to the long tragedy and turmoil Berlin had faced during the Cold War.